Story 6. What the Sonar Found. The K-329 left Murmansk on the 14th of November 1978. She was a Project 671 RTM Victor-class attack submarine, one of the finest of her generation, capable of diving to operational depths that NATO vessels could not follow. Her crew numbered 73 men. Her orders were classified at the highest level, as most orders were in those years. Her mission, as understood by her captain, was signals interception and passive surveillance in the North Atlantic Corridor, a stretch of cold, black water that the Soviet Navy treated like a front line in a war that had never been officially declared. Her captain was Commander Alexei Grigorievich Volkov, 44 years old, decorated, former executive officer on 2 previous postings, a man described by his political officer as reliable in judgment, cold in temperament, unlikely to panic. The kind of man you gave a submarine to. He was not prepared for what his sonar operator found on the 18th of November at 03:47 hours at a depth of 600 meters in water so dark it pressed against the hull like a living thing. What I am about to read to you is drawn from the recovered incident log, several crew testimonies given to naval historians in the mid-1990s, and one document that was partially declassified in 2007 and then reclassified within 11 months without explanation. Make of that what you will. Senior sonar operator Pyotr Ilyich Menshov had been awake for 19 hours when he heard it. He was not supposed to be awake for 19 hours. The rotation schedule aboard the K-329 was strict, 6 hours on, 6 hours off, the rhythm of it grinding every man down into a kind of functional exhaustion that passed for normalcy on long patrols. But Menshov had been unable to sleep. He told investigators later that the water had sounded different for 2 days before the incident. Not different in any way he could quantify, not different in any way that appeared on the instruments, just different to his ears, a quality in the passive sonar feed that he could not name but could not ignore. Other sonar operators hear silence and call it quiet. Menshov heard silence and called it texture. He had been doing this job for 11 years. He had spent more of his adult life underwater listening to the ocean than he had spent on the surface in daylight. The North Atlantic had its own vocabulary of sound, the long groaning of tectonic plates under pressure, the vast, slow migrations of biological life, the hollow geometries of deep-sea cold currents pressing against warmer layers above. He knew these sounds the way a man knows his own house at night. He knew which ones meant nothing, and which ones meant something, and which ones meant something he hadn't heard before. What he heard in those 2 days before the incident was the last category. The ocean sounded as if it were listening. What he heard at 03:47 hours was not silence. It came from directly below them. The K-329 was running at 600 meters, already at the lower edge of their safe operational envelope, drawn deeper by the thermal layers that masked their acoustic signature from American hydrophone arrays. Below them, the seafloor in that section of the North Atlantic lay at approximately 4,000 meters, a chasm, a cold, lightless tomb that no instrument they carried was designed to reach. The contact was at approximately 2,200 meters. Menshov ran his checks twice before he said anything. He calibrated the system. He ruled out biological returns, whale song, the groaning migrations of deep ocean life. He ruled out geological noise, the long, slow exhalation of the seafloor.
He ruled out acoustic shadow artifacts, the sonar ghosts that sometimes appeared and vanished like dreams. What he was left with was a contact, solid, dense, large, very large. He pressed the intercom. "Con, sonar, I have a contact. Bearing 000 relative, range approximately 1,600 meters below our current depth, classification unknown." Commander Volkov was on the con within 2 minutes. He stood behind Menshov in the cramped sonar room and listened to the audio feed himself. He later described it in his log as a low-frequency pulsing, regular, approximately every 4 seconds, unlike any biological or mechanical signature in our classification library. He listened for 7 minutes. Then he asked the question that would define the next 48 hours. Is it moving? Menshov adjusted his filters, ran the bearing again, compared two samples taken 90 seconds apart. "No, sir," he said. "It is stationary." Commander Volkov returned to the Khan and composed a flash message to Northern Fleet Headquarters in Severomorsk. The message read, in part, "Contact bearing 000 relative at extreme depth beyond classification capability. Request guidance." The response came 3 hours later, after what Volkov later calculated must have been consultations at levels well above his own admiral's pay grade. It read, "Investigate and report. Approach with caution. Do not surface." They descended at 800. The K-329 was rated for operational depths of 400 meters, with a tested limit of approximately 550 meters. What Commander Volkov ordered, what he was ordered to order, was a descent into water that the submarine was not built to survive. He was a precise man. He noted in his log that he passed this information to Severomorsk and received in return a message that contained only 4 words. "Confirm receipt. Proceed immediately." The crew knew something was wrong before they were told. That is always the way on a submarine. The boat is small. 73 men share approximately 600 square meters of pressure-sealed space. Tension moves through a submarine crew the way pressure moves through water, invisibly, at great speed, arriving everywhere at once. The political officer, a young man named Kosakov, who had the bad habit of appearing in rooms just after decisions were made, found reasons to visit most of the stations that morning without asking any direct questions. He was doing what political officers did, taking the temperature, assessing, logging. Volkov watched him do it and said nothing. Kosakov's report, filed after the voyage, noted that crew morale was adequate, with appropriate vigilance. This was the language of a man who had seen the fear on everyone's face and had chosen not to call it by its name. At 0827, the K-329 passed through 700 meters. At 0841, they passed through 800 meters. The hull began to speak. Those who have never been aboard a submarine at depth do not understand that pressure is not silent. It works on the steel. It creaks and pops and groans in the frame and in the bulkheads, and the sound is not the mechanical sound of machinery. It is something more organic, something that sounds disturbingly like the hull is alive and afraid. Each sound carries into the interior through the bones of the structure, through the deck plates, through the welded frames. You feel it in your feet before you hear it in your ears. The men in the reactor room told investigators that the hull sounds at 800 meters were different from anything they had experienced on previous deep trials, that they had a regularity to them, almost a rhythm, as if the pressure were probing rather than pressing.
At 900 meters, a hydraulic seal on the secondary ballast manifold began to weep. Engineering reported it. Volkov ordered it monitored. He did not order a halt. At 940 meters, Menshoff reported that the contact was still there, still stationary, still pulsing every 4 seconds, still large. He could give them a size now. He had been running passive ranging calculations for 2 hours. The methodology was inexact. Passive sonar was not designed for objects at this distance and depth. The acoustic environment at extreme depth introduced distortions that affected every variable. But Menshoff had cross-checked his calculations 3 times using different assumptions and arrived at the same number each time. He showed Volkov the figures. Volkov looked at them for a long moment. He was, as his political officer had noted, cold in temperament, unlikely to panic. "Run it again," he said. Menshoff ran it again. The estimate did not change. The object below them was approximately 900 meters in length. For context, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the largest surface vessel in the American fleet at that time, was approximately 330 meters long. The object on Menshov's sonar was nearly 3 times that length. It was sitting at 2,200 meters of depth in the North Atlantic, pulsing every 4 seconds like a heart, and it had not moved since they first detected it. They reached 1,060 meters at 11:04 hours. The hull was singing by then, a constant low moan that the crew had stopped remarking on because remarking on it changed nothing. 3 more minor leaks had been reported and contained. The sonar room was ice cold. The passive arrays ran better in cold water, and the heating in that compartment had been deliberately reduced to improve sensitivity. Menshov sat in his coat and his headphones and did not take his eyes off the display. He had requested stimulants, the Soviet Navy's version of the pilot's Go pills, amphetamine tablets kept in a locked medical kit, and had been told no. He drank tea from a thermos and kept his hand steady through an act of will that he later described as the hardest thing he had ever done. The object below them had not moved. It pulsed every 4 seconds, steady as a heart. At 11:12, something changed. Menshov's hand went to the gain control. He pulled off his headphones and pressed one ear against the speaker housing. His voice when he spoke was very tearful. "Commander, the interval has changed." Volkov was at his side in seconds. "What do you mean?" "The pulse interval. It has been 4 seconds since we first detected it. It is now—" Menshov paused, counting. 3.8 seconds, and decreasing." The 2 men looked at each other. "Could be a calibration drift," the executive officer said from the doorway. He had appeared without anyone noticing. "It is not," Menshov said. "I recalibrated at 0900 and again at 1045. The system is accurate." Volkov straightened. He clasped his hands behind his back, a habit his crew recognized as the physical gesture he made when he was thinking something he did not want to say aloud. "It is accelerating its pulse," he said finally. No one replied, because there was nothing to say to that. You could talk about equipment and calibration and acoustic distortion for as long as you wanted, but something 900 meters long, in water 2 kilometers below the surface of the North Atlantic, did not calibrate, did not drift. Its pulse rate had been constant for 14 hours. Now it was increasing. There was only one interpretation available. It knew they were there. At 11:31, the object began to move.
Menshov announced it in a flat voice, the voice of a man who has decided that emotion is a luxury he cannot afford. Contact is now mobile. Bearing has shifted. Range. He paused. His hand tightened on the console. Range is decreasing. "It's coming up," the executive officer said. "Yes," said Menshov, "it is coming up." Volkov ordered battle stations. He ordered a hard rise in depth. Blow ballast, emergency ascent, bring the boat up as fast as the hull could stand it. He sent a message to Severomorsk. "Contact is mobile. Contact is ascending. Request emergency extraction." The response, when it came 20 minutes later, was a single sentence. "Maintain position. Continue observation." Volkov read the message. He read it again. Then he placed it face down on the chart table and ordered the ascent anyway. He told investigators, years later, that he would have done the same thing regardless of what orders he was given, that some decisions supersede rank, that there are things in the North Atlantic that the Soviet Navy had no right to ask its men to face. He was asked whether he considered the professional consequences of disobeying a direct order. He said yes. He said he weighed those consequences against the alternative and found the calculation straightforward. What he did not say, but what appears in his private journal, is that the reason he ordered the ascent was not purely tactical. It was that at 11:33, 2 minutes after Menshov first announced the contact was moving, the entire crew of the K-329, all 73 men, in every compartment simultaneously, heard something through the hull. Not a mechanical sound, not a geological sound, not the groaning of a hull under pressure or the distant engines of a surface ship. A sound that Volkov in his journal described as follows: low, sustained, with a quality of variation that suggested, I understand how this sounds, and I wrote it down anyway, that suggested intent. The men in the engine room stopped what they were doing. The cook dropped a pan. I stood on the con, and the hair on my arms was raised, and I thought of the very first time I was ever submerged as a midshipman, and the fear I had then, and I felt that same fear, but larger, much larger. The sound lasted approximately 40 seconds. When it stopped, no one spoke for a long time. Then Kozakov crossed himself, the political officer, a party member. He crossed himself, and none of us said anything about it. The ascent took 47 minutes. During those 47 minutes, the contact closed the distance between them by 800 meters. The pulse rate at the end, Menshov's final notation before he stopped recording and simply held on to his console with both hands, was 1.2 seconds. Fast, urgent, the rhythm of something that has decided to hurry. Menshov described the sound in his testimony. He said it was not mechanical. I have heard every machine the Americans and we and the British put in the water. I have heard whales. I have heard geological venting. I have heard things in the Barents Sea that I reported and was told to forget. He paused. This was not any of those things. This was like... Another pause, longer. This was like listening to something breathe. At 12:18, the K-329 reached 430 meters, and the contact stopped. It had closed to within 300 meters of their hull. Then it stopped, held its depth. Its pulse slowed gradually over the course of 11 minutes back to its original 4-second interval, as if it had decided something, as if it had looked at them, at this small, fragile thing of steel and air and frightened men, and made a decision. The sound did not come again.
The hull was silent, except for the hiss of water over the bow and the quiet mechanical respiration of the boat's systems. Menshov sat at his console and tracked the contact, as it slowly, over the course of an hour, descended, back down through the layers, back toward the seafloor, back to wherever it had been when they first arrived, back to waiting. The K-329 surfaced in a gray North Atlantic swell at 1340 hours. Commander Volkov ordered radio silence broken and transmitted a full incident report to Severomorsk. Within 6 hours, 2 surface vessels were dispatched to their position. They were not rescue vessels. They were intelligence ships, carrying deep-towed sonar arrays and a contingent of men whose uniforms bore no unit insignia. Those men came aboard the K-329 while she was still on the surface. They spent 9 hours in the sonar room. They took every recording Menshov had made. They erased the ship's log entries for the 18th through 19th of November. They interviewed each member of the crew individually in a compartment that Volkov was not permitted to enter, in sessions that averaged 45 minutes each. They told the crew that what they had detected was an uncharted geological feature, a thermal vent system producing anomalous acoustic signatures. Senior sonar operator Menshov nodded and said he understood. He did not believe them. He had told investigators this without hesitation. A thermal vent does not accelerate, he said. A thermal vent does not slow down when you run from it. A thermal vent does not follow you. He was quiet for a moment. And a thermal vent does not stop. He was asked what he thought it was. He was quiet for a long time. I think, he said at last, that whatever is at the bottom of the North Atlantic has been there for a very long time, and I think that for most of that time nothing has been rude enough to go looking for it. He looked at his hands. We were rude enough, and it noticed, and it came up to look at us. He looked up, and then it decided we weren't worth the trouble. He paused. I try very hard, he said, to find that comforting. 3 of the 73 men aboard the K-329 that day refused to return to submarine service after the voyage. They were reassigned to shore posts, and their service records contain no explanation. 2 of them, in the 1990s, gave independent testimonies to the same researcher without knowing the other had spoken. Their accounts matched on every major detail, including the sound, including the 40 seconds of sound that the hull had transmitted into the bones of every man aboard. When the researcher asked each of them what they thought the sound had been, what that sustained, variable, low-frequency transmission had meant, both men gave, independently, the same answer. They said it sounded like a question.
Whatever was down there could have covered it in an instant. But it stopped. It had come up 400 meters to look at us, and then it stopped. And it went back down. I keep asking myself, why did it stop? And the only answer I can find, the only answer that makes any sense at all, is the one that keeps me awake.